repetition in the sense that you'll get the commandments from God, and then you'll get that they were done. And so you hear the whole thing again, and I kept thinking about, why is that? Well, it's easy to remember if you hear it twice, right? It's gonna stick with you if you not only hear what God commanded, but this is our response to the commandment. We actually did it. This is what we did in response to the commandment, and then you can see them match up, right? So verses 1 through whatever that is, probably 7. 1 through 7 on this page here. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, "Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodged tonight." Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, "Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in times to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever." So, chapter 3, we got the story, the command to cross the Jordan, and the ark goes down there, and the priests with the ark stand in the midst of it while everybody passes, while everybody goes. We get a little bit more details here. We get a little bit more about the command, and this part of the command is while you're doing this, you need to have 12 guys, 1 from each tribe, collect a stone, throw it on their shoulder, and carry it across from the area where the priests are standing on dry ground, right? And then set them up as a memorial stone on the west side of the Jordan, crossing from the east to the west to the plains of Jericho. So on the west side, they're gonna sleep that night on the west side of the Jordan, and Joshua is commanded to set up these memorials with these 12 guys. All right? Yeah. When I researched it, there's a lot of people who suppose that this might be it, this might be it, this might be it. There is a point when this was written when it says that they're still there today, but that's when this was written.
By this time, the tourists would have taken the rocks up.
Yeah, it's been a long time since this happened. 3,000 years more. So I wouldn't be. My thought is that it's less likely for them to still be there than to be gone. Somebody would have come along and kind of messed it up, scattered them a little bit or something. Right. But for some time, especially in during the conquest of all of Canaan and time after that, maybe through the judges, that you could have gone there and pointed to your kids and said, "This is where it happened. These stones are from the Jordan, and we set them up here to remember that the Jordan was completely dry when we crossed it." I thought about that a little bit this week. It wasn't muddy. It wasn't a quagmire down there, which you would think if the water stopped on the Jordan, you would think that right after the water stopped or were cut off, that the ground down there would have been muddy, like kind of a quagmire. There's some stones, yeah, there's some rocks, there's some stuff, but the part that's kind of, it'll be silty or, you know what I'm saying? It'll be wet. There'll be some wetness to it. But it says, every time it says on dry ground, on dry land. And that's the same as the other one that's mentioned a little bit later, that this is supposed to set up to remind them also of the crossing of the Red Sea, which was also dry land. right? So it's even more of a miracle when you think about that. It's not just that the water stopped. It's the water stopped, and now there's dry ground where moments before there was wet. It was wet ground. It was muddy, right? So it's even more of a miracle. Somebody have a question or hand up? Yeah.
Well, I might just make a comment.
Yeah.
A little later on, Joshua was going to throw a stone up in the area of Samaria. And it's called the Joshua Stone. The reason I mention it is when Alfred and I were over there, the guide that we had, the Jewish guide, was so determined to get into this area because he'd heard that they had found this Joshua Stone. And they did have the stone, and it was broken in half, 2 pieces. But still, there was no way to prove it, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Just an interesting little bit of whatever.
Yeah, I think Luke Chandler mentioned that one when he was here. The idea is to remember this happened to and we'll get more into that next. I mentioned some other scripture up here, which is what was number 13 about? I don't remember what I was thinking when I put those up. So let me look real quick. Oh yeah, so Numbers 13 is when the 12 spies are sent by Moses, and it was one from each tribe. And so I got that connection that there's one from each tribe, 12 spies, also 12, one from each tribe that grabs the stone, so that every child of Israel, of Jacob, is represented in the memorial. Same with the spies. Not just one tribe went out and spied, or two tribes, although that's what happens just before we read last week, that he only sent out 2 spies to Jericho. Or is that coming up? That's coming up a little bit later. He only spends two spies out to Jericho, but he sends 12, one from each tribe to get the stones, similar to when they sent out the spies back in Numbers. And that's also in Deuteronomy 1:19 through 33. And then Isaiah 1:19, hop over there real quick. It says, if you are willing and obedient, you shall eat the good of the land. So this shows their willingness to do what God commands. If God commands it and you're willing to do it, it's going to be good for you. It's good for them. And John 14:15, which is obeying the commandment. We know that one says that if you love me, you will do what I command, right? So that's what we're talking about. So this is the first time we hear it in chapter 4, the command from God. And then the next one is the response, which is the obedience to God, right? So, this one reads, and the children of Israel, starting in verse 8, chapter 4, verse 8, and we'll go through verse 14. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, just as God commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in a place where the feet of the priests had bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So this verse, I'm going to stop there for a second. This verse confused me at first because it sounds like he set up the stones in the Jordan where it was dry, where they were standing. But we know that that's not the case. That it's the way that the Hebrew language goes. The stones were taken from there, and they were set up in this dry land when they got over, which we'll see more the further we read. Because that was the commandment back in verse. Verse 3 says, and the Lord commanded them, saying, take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Now, I was thinking from this verse, there's a possibility that he might have set up the 12 stones in the midst of the river while they were crossing, a temporary memorial for them to look on as they passed, and then reset it up afterwards when they crossed. But that's the only other way I could see this as just another way of saying that's what they're doing. They're grabbing these stones from the middle of the river and moving them to dry land so that we can come back later and say to our kids, this is, I want you to see these because this is proof that we crossed on dry land. Here's some stones from the middle of the river that we set up here as a memorial. So we'll continue on verse 9. Then Joshua set up the 12 stones. Verse 10. So the priest who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people hurried and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho. Is that where we're at? Nope, a couple more. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. So we get the response that they obeyed. They did everything that God commanded them about the memorial stones. And then we get this other part, which was mentioned in an earlier chapter of Joshua, about the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, sending their warriors, their men of war, the men who could fight, over to the other side of the Jordan, even though their land, their promised land, actually they took part on the eastern side of the Jordan. And that goes back to Numbers 32 is where that happened. And Deuteronomy 3:12 through 22, if you want to read it, that's when Moses and these tribes discussed it and came to an agreement. They came to a covenant about this, that yes, you can settle there and you can raise, because it's good land for your herds. You can settle there, but to settle there, you still need to send men of war with the other tribes across the Jordan into Canaan to fight alongside their brethren for the other parts of the promised land until they are settled, until your other tribes are settled. So this is honoring their promise. They're actually doing it, right? So it's a really good indication of these three tribes honoring their agreement, doing what they said they were going to do, right? Being men of their word, right? So it's a good time. And then the third thing that happens right here is Joshua is exalted. And back in chapter 3, verse 7, is where God promised that would happen. The Lord said in Joshua 3:7 says, and the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that you may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. So this is where it starts happening. And it says it. It says that on that day, when they had the miracle of crossing on dry land and setting up the memorials, that the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel. And they feared him as they had feared Moses all the days of his life. So this is now they're listening to Joshua. They know Joshua is a man of God and is speaking for God, just as Moses had spoke for God. So they're listening to him, right? Okay. It brings us to the last part of Joshua 4. Starting in verse 15 and through 24 to the end of the chapter. It says, then the Lord spoke to Joshua saying, command the priest who bear the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan. Joshua therefore commanded the priest, saying, come up from the Jordan. And it came to pass when the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord had come up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet touched the dry land, that the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all the banks as before. So Oliver mentioned this last week, that this time of year, the Jordan River would have been overflowing the banks. It would have been a high river, right? It would have been really dangerous to cross, except that God stopped the waters about a mile upriver at another place that was mentioned last week, and they crossed on dry land. But now that they're all past, here comes the water, and it's overflowing the banks again, right? Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they camped in Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up in Gilgal. Then he spoke to the children of Israel, saying, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? then you shall let the children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, as the Lord your God did into the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over, that all of the people of the earth may know the hand of the Lord, that it is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever. And I think one version I saw where it says fear the Lord is obey. Obey the Lord your God forevermore. Yes, like I said before, this shows that it's even more than sometimes it's even more than we kind of gloss over it. Like this is, it's a really amazing miracle that you could cross on dry land on something what I think would be muddy or slippery. We're talking about a dry, safe passage on something that I imagine, like right when it got dry, it probably was slippery, but the miracle made it everything dry, made it safe for every nation. But it happens over and over. They passed through dry land here. They did the Red Sea. They did it here on the Jordan, and then we pass through water in baptism as part of our salvation, right? So that's the only things that I had about that. Any questions, comments about chapter 4? Yeah, all right. Chapter 5. This is a long reading through verse 12. Okay, so it was when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel until we had crossed over, or they had crossed over, that their fear melted. No, that their heart melted, sorry. That their heart melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives for yourselves and circumcise the sons of Israel, again the second time or second generation. So Joshua made flint knives for himself and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskins, or Gilbeth Haraloth, the hill of the foreskins. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All of the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness till all the people who were men of war who came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons whom he had raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way. So it was, when they had finished circumcising all the people, that they stayed in their place in the camp till they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, this day I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you. Therefore the name of the place is called Gilgal to this day. Gilgal apparently means rolling. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land. And the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. Wow. So a lot of stuff going on here. What I was trying to find was some more information about the circumcision factor, because it seems like it's pretty clear, even back in Genesis 17, 1 through 14, when he sets up this covenant with Abraham, that they're supposed to do it when they're young, when they're 8 days. They're supposed to circumcise the males, the young males. So they weren't doing that. They didn't do that for a long time. They didn't do that for 40 years. Sounds like anybody born out there in the wilderness didn't get it done. So there's some who were probably close to 40 or maybe even 40 years old who hadn't been circumcised yet. They get circumcised with flint knives. Now, it reminded me of this one little bit in Exodus 4, verses 24 through 26. Anybody remember that? What happened there? It's a strange little excerpt. Like God has made contact with Moses, and he's commanded him to go back to Egypt and set the people. He set him up with Aaron, and he's going back. And then it says in Exodus 24, verses 24, it says, "And it came to pass on the way at the encampment that the Lord met him and sought to kill him," talking about Moses. "Then Zipporah," that's Moses' wife, "took a sharp stone," or a flint stone, "and cut off the foreskin of her son and cast it at Moses' feet and said, 'Surely you are the husband of blood to me.' So he," God, "let him go." So God let Moses go. Then she cried out, "You are a husband of blood because of the circumcision." So I was always, this always popped out at me like, wow, what's going on there? Well, God commands something, we're supposed to obey. Like we just read in chapter 4, like God commands something you're supposed to obey. And God had commanded Abraham back in Genesis 17 to have the firstborn, or the young males, all males, not just firstborn, but all males are supposed to be circumcised. And it appears that Moses hadn't done that with his own son. And that obviously caused some problem between his relationship with God, because God got angry with him and sought to, maybe he said do it and he didn't do it or something. So there's a problem here. And Zipporah actually saves the day and does it for him. But we got the same situation going on here, but he seems a lot more, Joshua seems a lot more quicker to when God commands it, to do it. Even though he hasn't said anything about it for 40 years, God hasn't said, "Hey, what's going on? Why aren't you doing this? You're supposed to be doing this every boy who's only 8 days old. You're supposed to be doing it, but you're not doing it," right? Now he says, "Do it." Joshua hops to it and does it, and everything's okay because we're obeying, because they are obeying God, right? This chapter starts with the Gentiles, the other people, getting fearful of God and Israel, the nation of Israel, because of what they're hearing that God's doing for them. And it goes back to what we got from Joshua 2:11, when Rahab tells the spies why she's lying to the king of Jericho and hiding them and helping them escape and setting a deal with them to spare her and her household when they come, because she knows that God's working for Israel and he's gonna win. But some of the things she lists back there on 2:11 are some of the same things that we're talking about. That God freed them from Egypt. So 2:11 says, "And as soon as we heard these things," this is Rahab speaking. Well, it starts even in verse 10. It says, "For we heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted." So she's saying that it's already happened. Even before this, it already happened. Before the Jordan River crossing, they were already, hearts melted. They were already afraid of these people that were coming up from Egypt, the Israelites. And here it is again that we were seeing it at the beginning of chapter 5, that they're greatly afraid. Their hearts are melted. And then the last part of this is Israel keeps the covenants with God, especially the ones about the circumcision. And what I found just recently, today actually, was that circumcision was a part of, you had to be circumcised to participate in the Passover. That was one of the laws for the Passover. I think that's in, where is it? I just read it. Exodus 12, verses 6. No. Where is it? Anyway, back in Exodus somewhere. Exodus, where is it? I just had it. Where is it? Circumcision. Oh, here it is. Exodus 12, 44, and 48. I knew I had it here. Exodus 12, 44, and 48 demands that not only even the people, even if you had a stranger among you who was going to participate in the Passover, who was a male, he was supposed to be circumcised before he participated in the Passover. Even, like a slave or somebody who wasn't born in the house of Israel would have to have a circumcision done before they participated in the Passover. And that makes sense when you think about what's going on here, because now a couple days later, they are keeping the Passover, which made me think, well, were they not doing that in the 40 years? They haven't done it for the last 40 years? I would think they were doing it every year, right? But maybe not. Maybe think that they probably weren't, because they weren't circumcised. Some of the young men wouldn't have been circumcised, right? Maybe the older generation was keeping the Passover. I don't know. But the new generation couldn't have until they were circumcised, right? So interesting. But they're keeping their side of the covenant. The covenant with God is that they're supposed to keep the Passover, supposed to remember the Passover, right? And that's what they do. And they have unleavened bread, it mentions, right? It mentions that they eat unleavened bread on the Passover day and parched grain. And then it says another miracle stops. Manna stops flowing down from heaven every day except for Sabbath. Every day manna was going down for 40 years, except on Saturdays, right? And here, now that they had a full day where they ate only of the produce of Canaan, now the manna stops. You're going to eat off the land that's supposed to be flowing with milk and honey. There should be enough here produce for you to keep going, right? So an end of an era, as it were. So we come to this last part, the last few verses of chapter 5, starting in verse 13. And it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man, capitalized, stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us, or are you for our adversaries?" So he, this man, said, "No, but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped, and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy." And Joshua did so. So, reminiscent of the burning bush with Moses, right? Sandals got to be taken off because it's a holy place. I don't think necessarily the location was the reason why it's holy, but the fact that there was a presence of God there in some form. Same here. This is somebody who's been sent by God, so that makes it holy, a holy spot. And I think the idea is that what Moses did and what Joshua did is the proper response. Once you realize that you're in the presence of God, what do? You humble yourself. You bow down. You worship. You call on the name of the Lord. You fall your face to the ground. Might be appropriate response. I really find the question, "Are you for us or are you against us?" is kind of a interesting question to ask from Joshua. Might be what I would have asked, but I love the response. The response to me, sometimes people respond in ways you don't expect, and this is one of those times where this commander responds in a way that I didn't expect. He's basically saying, it's not you, it's not us and them. It's not adversaries or I'm for everybody. Right? I can't be for one of you because I'm for everybody, or I'm for none of you, right? It's like you don't get it. You don't get it both. It goes back to the idea that God is really no respecter of persons. He really isn't. Even when you're talking about his chosen people, he's talking to Joshua about his chosen people, and his chosen people are going to take Canaan right now, right? And he still says, "No, I'm not. I'm neither for you nor against them." It's not like that, So does anybody have any comments about this or questions about this? Because now we're getting to the Jericho. The destruction of Jericho is in chapter 6, and I'm running out of time, so I want to get to it. So we all know the story of Jericho and how it was destroyed. The first part is the commandment from God. Again, we get this pattern where God commands it and then they do it. We get it one time as the God commanding it and one time of them doing it. So that's what's going on in chapter 6. At first it says first that now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. So they knew Israel was coming. They knew they were coming, so they shut everything up. They know, they're ready for a siege, right? They're shut up. Nobody's coming and going. They're shut up, right? And then the Lord tells Joshua, "See, I have given you Jericho into your hands, its king and the mighty men of valor," right? Like them ready for siege is an indication that they're afraid, and it's an indication that God has given it to them, right? Even before anything's happened. And then God commands them to march around once a day for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, and that's with priests carrying the seven priests bearing 7 trumpets of rams in front of the ark, before the ark. And everybody walks around and they're quiet, and they blow the trumpets, is the only sound that they're hearing as they march around. I don't know how many miles it would have been. It probably been a few miles around the whole big city. But yeah, they went around every day for 6 days. And then everybody was commanded to be quiet until the seventh day, when they go around 7 times, which would have been a lot of miles, right? That would probably been, 2-3 miles each time. So 21 miles, maybe a marathon or something. I don't know. You tell me, or something like that. And then on the 7th time they go around, when Joshua told them they were supposed to yell and shout, and that's what happens. So they go around and they do exactly what God commanded. This is the whole theme of 4 through 6, is God commanded something and they did it. There was no hesitancy. They just did what God commanded every time. So it's like Oliver was saying last week, there's kind of a renewed attitude and spirit about the people in this second generation, where they were willing and ready to do what God commanded them as soon as he commanded them. Even stuff that wasn't fun. It wouldn't have been fun to get circumcised when you were 35, 40 years old, but they did it readily, right? And so it's a whole other thing. And they kept the Passover. They kept the covenants. They did everything that God commanded of them right away, right? The right time, the right way, the way that God said to do it, they did it, right? That's the idea. And that's the idea of Jericho and the walls fall down. God gives them Jericho because they obeyed him exactly what he said to do in this chapter 6. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm trying to just get this. They started early in the morning. They went out the dawn on the 7th day, and they marched around 7 times, and they blew the horns, and everybody yelled, and the walls come tumbling down. We know the story, right? I don't really have anything to add to it. It's all there. It's easy to understand, and like I said, we get it as a command, and then as them doing it. And that's the whole idea, I think, of these 3 chapters is God commands something, we do it, right? So any questions, any concerns about all this? Should be out of time, right? 35, 36, or I got more time? Oh, 45? Oh. I'm hurrying for no reason. I can go back.
I'm just going to make an interesting comment. The people on the other side of the Jordan would have not expected the children of Israel to be coming across at that time it's flooding. We got a little more time here. We're going to have to get things put together. And then all at once, God stops them there when the people cross over. And wouldn't that have melted their hearts then? That would have put fear into their heart. Really.
Yeah. Yeah.
Once what they thought was a little protection, now it's sort of disappeared while they crossed over.
Yeah.
They already knew they didn't want to have anything to do with Israel because their God, Israel's God, was a very protective and supportive God of the nation.
And he demonstrated power through a lot of interesting wonders, miracles, that spread, the word of those miracles spread far and wide, I'm sure.
Well known.
Yeah, well known.
It wasn't hidden.
Yeah. I could see why you'd be afraid of that nation coming towards you.
If it happened today, you'd be afraid of it.
Oh, yeah.
I would.
Oh, yeah. And this point, through this point, like I said, through the first 6 chapters of Joshua, it's exactly, God commands it and they hop to. Joshua's on it. And he's telling them exactly what God told him, and they're doing exactly what is commanded of them. There's no hesitation. There's no problems. Of course, that's going to change. Whoever teaches next week, they're going to have to start dealing with when the change happens. But up to this point, now they're obeying God word for word, and there's a lot of good stuff and a lot of correlations to, I've always thought of Joshua as kind of a precursor of Jesus, a foreshadowing of Jesus. The names are similar. Actually, they're almost identical except for time and language barriers, changes in languages. But he's kind of the first. Well, Moses would have been really the first judge, and we judges isn't really about what we consider judges. It's leaders. These are the leaders of Israel, and oftentimes the savior of Israel. The judges are kind of come in and save when it gets so bad they need saving. Somebody steps up and saves the nation again, and they turn back to God again. And of course, the pattern is what's going to happen actually right after this chapter with this nation of Israel is they start doing their own thing again. They stop obeying God right away, and they start doing their own thing again, disobeying, doing what he says not to do, and it starts causing them problems, and they have to go through this cycle of man following every man after his own heart till it gets bad enough where we got to do something about it and change it back around. And that kind of happens all the way through Judges.
They just got through spending 40 years in the wilderness because of their disobedience.
Yep.
They're just like us. You think we'd learn?
They watched all their fathers die. You had to wait till the last one died before you could even enter. They didn't cross this Jordan until every one of them died. Maybe the last one died right before it. I don't know. But they were all, that generation that was in Egypt is all gone.
We know he didn't drown in the Jordan.
Yeah, they didn't drown in Jordan. So, a lot of good stuff and a lot of good a moment of obedience, a time of obedience from God's people, which is a good thing. We get a good example in these chapters that this is the way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to do what God says and do it as he says it, when he says it, how he says it, without any hesitation, without any doubt, right? So, any other comments, questions, concerns? Yes?
Don't forget Rahab.
Yeah. She was in chapter, he went over her mostly, but that's what happens. We get the fulfillment of the promise to Rahab. Steve's exactly right. We finally see that they're true to their word. Even that, Joshua upholds the word that the spies had, the deal that the spies had made with Rahab. That's down in verse 17 or 18. It says, 17. Only Rahab the harlot shall live, and she and all who are with her in the house, because she hid the messengers that were sent. So when it happens, it's down in verse 25. And Joshua spared Rahab the harlot, her father's household, and all that she had. So she dwells in Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. And the interesting thing, from Oliver last week talked about it. Rahab lived on the wall. What's that called? Yeah. So she lived on the wall. So we know the walls fell down, but there's at least one part of the wall, her house, that probably didn't fall down. At least maybe it fell down on that side, and the inside part stayed up, or something. So some way God protected those people in that household, or the wall didn't go down for that one particular household, or something, because of this promise. Rahab was protected, and of course Rahab ends up being in the line of Jesus. So it's another time when God uses a Gentile to save the people and to save the line of Jesus. Really, I mean, it's very interesting. We get another one with Ruth. She's in the line as well, and that's just part of the dealio, right? We have to. That's right, and he makes things that we think might be negative. He makes them work for the good of the people who love him and follow him. Right? That's what he does. He turns it to good use. We think, oh no, this is why is he saving her? She's a harlot, and But there's reasons. There's reasons. God has his reasons. I may not understand them all, but God has his reasons to use the people the way he uses them, and situations the way that they happen. He's in control, and sometimes that's all I have to do is just say, God's in control. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Everything's happening the way it's supposed to happen. I need to trust God, right? Not lean on my own understanding. Excellent. Thanks, Steve, for reminding me about Rahab. Anything else?
Don't rebuild Jericho.
Oh yeah, I have some notes on that as well, because that is one thing that's in there. There's a curse that's at the end. It says in verse 26 that Joshua charged them at the time, saying, "Cursed be the man before the Lord who rises up and builds this city Jericho. He shall lay its foundations with his firstborn, and with his youngest he shall set up his gates." And then it says, so the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout all the country. That's the ending of chapter 6. But this interesting curse that thank you, Oliver, for reminding me. It comes true in 1 Kings 16:34. Anybody knew that? That actually happens within the Bible a little bit later in 1 Kings 16. And I think that was during the time of Ahab. In the time of Ahab, 1 Kings 16, what did I say, 24? 34. Thank you. And it says in verse 34, and we know it's Ahab because in verse 33 it says, "And Ahab made a wooden image. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord God of Israel to anger than all the kings of Israel before him." And then verse 34, "In his days, Ahab's days, Heel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation with Abiram, his firstborn, and with his youngest son, Segub, he set up its gates, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through Joshua the son of Nun." Refers right back to this verse where this curse comes out. Not supposed to rebuild it. Heel did. And it lost his 2 sons by doing so, that was the curse. You're going to lose your sons if you rebuild this city. So God fulfilled that promise as well, that curse. Thanks for reminding me of that one, Oliver. I keep forgetting all the stuff I had in chapter 16 because I felt hurried. I'm sorry, I felt hurried. I had 10 more minutes than I thought I had. Anything else? Any other questions? Concerns? Comments?
Not a question.
Yeah.
Thought, Israel, when they were getting ready to, one of the last final plagues where they had put blood on their animal so the destroyer would pass over them.
That's the firstborn plague. It's a Passover. It's what the Passover is based on.
Right, they had blood on the mantle, and then Rahab hung the velvet.
Scarlet. That's right.
Out the window.
To mark her where she lived. Yeah. Which they would have seen as they circled the city every day, and they would have seen it 7 times that last day. They would have known that. Don't mess with that. Don't kill anybody in that household. Not anybody inside that window, because that's Rahab and her family. And we told her that anybody she brought in her house there were safe on this day when we're going to totally, utterly destroy Jericho, which they're supposed to utterly destroy everything in Jericho. God starts commanding these things. And I think he did it back with Og and Sidon too, where he says, nothing is to be spared. You know? I think back then he actually said we could spare the young girls to make them wives of the younger children or whatever's coming up, but everything's supposed to be utterly destroyed. And God's saying, don't take anything, and that's where we start having problems in chapter 17. Is because they don't obey that part. I'll say that for whoever's next week, just a preview. But if you read ahead, that's what you'll start seeing is not doing it God's way, not obeying the commands fully, right? But yeah, there's a correlation with marking the window with scarlet, similar to marking the doors with the blood of the lamb back in Egypt to mark the houses that were safe, the marking of the houses. Thanks, Jim. Anything else? I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you.